Hello friends, we are filming late into the day. It's already 7 p.m. but I got home a lot earlier than usual. My work ends at 7. It takes me about 30 minutes to get here. So usually I get home around 7:30 and I'm tired. So I'm finally doing my top books of 2022. Hello. So jumping in because 2 days ago the strike ended for the HarperCollins union and they have voted to ratify the contract. I filmed the first part of this video I think a few days before the strike ended, and at the time they were still in negotiations, so they were still talking. So I thought it'd take a few more days, or at least like a week and a half or so before everything ended. But I'm so glad that the HarperCollins union strike has ended, because what they're fighting for is it's literally just give them a living wage, you know? I was planning on putting like all the information plus ways to help them, as they have been on strike since November, and then the strike ended before I was able to edit this video. So now I'm jumping in so I can talk about all the books that are published by HarperCollins for my top books of 2022. So let's get started. Again, in no particular order. I think this is mostly going to be like when I read it. So first up, Dragon Republic and the Burning God. Yes, it's a little bit late. It's already 2023. I'm talking about this book, and Burning God released at this point like 2 years ago now. But I read this like January because I know I was reading a Poppy War around like December, and then I finished Dragon Republic January, and then Burning God also like middle of January. I remember because I got COVID on the day that I finished this one, that I like read majority of this one, was when I got exposed to COVID, and I got COVID like the next day. So I still remember that was quite memorable. And funnily enough, I was exposed to COVID like last week. Miracle of all miracles, I didn't get COVID. I don't know how that worked. But anyway, I don't think I need to really talk about what this book is about, because a lot of people already know about it, and you know why I probably loved it. Just the writing, the characters, the historical aspect of it, because this is based on the Sino-Japanese War. Just overall, I love this book so much. It is up and down. It's very gory. There's a lot of violence. I cried so much at the ending of this book. This is one of those books that I will always recommend to people, especially if I think that, you know, they will enjoy it, because this is quite a dense book. I feel like someone who enjoys like fantasy and also enjoys historical fiction will really like this one. And I think my friend will like this too, the one that I lent, or actually I bought a copy for them to read. So my two coworkers, the first person that I lent it to, he loves learning about history, so I thought he was gonna really like it, Babble. So I gave him a copy, and then I told my other coworker about it, and she said she wanted to read it too, so I bought her a copy to read as well. They're reading it right now, but I think especially him, I think he will really enjoy this one. He's already asked me about it. It was like, once you finish Babble, I'm gonna give you this one. I think you're gonna really like it. So yes, I enjoyed this one. Oh, I love this one. One of my top favorite fantasy books of all time now. And then another one that like this is one of like the surprising books that I read this year, and I think I'm gonna include it in that video that I'm gonna make, A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. So this one's actually the February Illumicrate box, which I chose to skip because I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna like it. I'm just gonna choose to skip that one. And then I got approved for NetGalley art, and I loved it. I ended up really loving it so much. So this is a high fantasy adult, I think new adult, more like new adult. It doesn't really have any R-rated things in it, but it's like a YA new adult kind of like in between. What I really love the whimsy of this book. One of the main things that I always enjoy in books are when they're very transportive, very atmospheric, like the vibes are great, but I also love when characters have that much depth in them. And the way that these characters were written, you can just tell that there's a certain like connection between the characters. It's not written directly, like that they have this connection, but the way that they interact with each other, the way that they speak and think about each other, you can tell that they have this like really, I don't know how to say it, but like this connection between these characters. And sometimes even when, you know, they don't realize how deep their connection is or how layered and complex their relationship is, it still shows through when you read it from their perspective. So this is I believe this is third person, but we're following I think 4 main characters. Beautiful writing. I have not read anything from Rebecca Ross before, and because of this one I actually recently bought I think all of the books that she has out so far. I do have the sequel for this book because the sequel came out last year as well. I haven't read it, but I do have the special editions and the regular UK large paperback edition of the book. I will be reading it soon because I need to read it. It is a duology, and I need to know what happens next, but I'm also a little bit scared. That's why I haven't actually picked it out. Beautiful writing, atmospheric, beautiful characters. Just it again transportive, because it's set in a small island too, where there's magic on this island, but outside of this island people don't really experience any kind of magic anymore. So Next one is a book that I've been meaning to read for a while now. I heard this one first from Emily from Books with Emily Fox or Books with Emily. This is, I would say, like a modern, yeah, it's a modern classic. It's written on the back. This is following a main character who has an unusually low IQ, who was born with it, and then he was approached to be the first human subject for this experiment that they were doing, where he's given a procedure to enhance his IQ, and we're following as he changes, and you know how he changed as his IQ gets higher and higher, and he ends up being a genius, I believe. Yeah, the treatment turns him into a genius. And also like the bond between the rat that was the subject before, Charlie, which is Algernon, and the changes that they're seeing with Algernon kind of like mirroring the changes that are happening with Charlie as well. What happens is that Algernon starts to fade, and so they have Charlie too was like thinking of, you know, how is it going to be different for him? How is it going to be for him? And it's just a story of like this one person who's just like a good person, and he just wanted to make friends. Essentially, that's why he said yes to this experiment. And you know, the way he grows and changes throughout the book, and it's really emotional. It's one of those like really reflective books that I feel like a lot of people should read. I really like this book, and I didn't even realize like how it looked, like the cover. I only ever like just really like the book because the design kind of looks like, you know, the brain, but then you have this outline of a person and a rat, and it's kind of like the brain kind of is an outline of the two of them, and it intersects. Yeah, I really love this one. Very emotional as well. Charlie's the kind of person that I feel like a lot of people meet, like a lot of us meet every day, but we don't see them. Yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna start crying if I talk about it more, but if you haven't read Flowers for Algernon, I highly recommend. Next one is Juniper Thorn by Ava Reid. I first read The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reid. That has been on my physical TBR, but then I got approved for the NetGalley arc for this book, so I read that one first. Juniper Thorn is like, it's next level. It's very similar to A River Enchanted, but A River Enchanted has more of a melancholic feel. This one has more of a gothic feel to it because there's a lot of really heavy, dark themes, and so check the trigger warnings for this one. But like I said, it's very similar in that it's very atmospheric, the writing is beautiful, and the characters are very compelling to read. But again, there's a lot more darkness and gore and violence in this book compared to A River Enchanted, and you can't help but root for the characters that you meet here, because we're following three sisters who have been living with their abusive father. Their father is very, very strict and has been using them for their magic, and it's them kind of like, you know, as they grow up more and see like their current situation and their want of like experiencing what they haven't experienced because of the way they have been treated and raised by their father. Writing themes. The themes are explored really well, in my opinion. The writing, very transportive. The story overall, the characters, just everything about this one was so unforgettable. Like, there's so many scenes in this book that I still, like, when I look at it, when I remember it, it's still vivid in my head. But yeah, a lot of trigger warnings for this one. Next one, I can't believe I got approved for an arc for this one as well. This is one of my highly anticipated releases of last year. The River of Silver by Shannon Chakraborty. This is the companion novella for the 𝐭𝐫 trilogy, and 𝐭𝐫 trilogy was one of my top favorite books of last year. I was just so excited for this one because I've always wanted to be back in the 𝐭𝐫 world, and you know, wanting more stories from the world, from the characters that we met there. What I really liked about this one is that we're not given like an open-ended ending for what happens after the main story of the 𝐭𝐫 trilogy. I believe there are a few parts of this book where it's happening after the trilogy, but for the most part it's mostly like the parts that happened in between the books that were not included, or like before the main story took place. Just more worlds from the world. That's why it's like Tales from the 𝐭𝐫 trilogy. And I loved seeing, like, going back into this world and like seeing the characters again. I love the way that it was done where I'm not left wanting more from the original story and kind of in a way changing the ending that I had or that I read from main story. It just gave me more stories from this world, which is exactly what I wanted. So I got the Fairly exclusive edition of this book. I wish I had the original trilogy. Fairly also had special editions for those, but I didn't get to get them. But it's very short too. I didn't expect it to be very short, but it was effective in delivering the story stories that I needed to hear from this world, again, because I missed it so much. So next one, last one, is again one of my most anticipated releases of this year, Babble by R.F. Kuang. Are we surprised that this is one of my favorite books of this year? No, we're not. No, we're not. I already talked about this book a lot in my wrap up. I do have an upcoming reading vlog when I read this a few months ago. It just so happened that I read the book during the strike. I think it happened around when the strike started, and I think around the time I didn't know the strike was happening. So I was planning on uploading it, I think last month, or like, you know, a little bit earlier, but thankfully I didn't, because again, the strike was going on at the time. I feel like for a lot of people that love this book, I'm going to say the same things, because I love it pretty much the same way that other people did. I know that there has been mixed things about this book. I appreciated this because I saw like what it was for me was just like perfect for me. So the themes were explored really, really well in my opinion. I love the characters, the growth, the way that we follow their story, even though we are following mainly Robin's story, seeing them too, I could definitely like see myself like reading similar to River Silver stories about our characters that we met, the 4 friends. And one of the main things that I really enjoyed about this book is the way that it explored etymology, the origin of words. I've always had a love for words and like its origin, where it came from and how it's changed throughout the years. And it kind of like reignited that interest in me, or like in a way it reminded me of that interest that I had when I was younger. It reminded me of why I loved learning about words and learning about the history of words and learning about, you know, how when it comes to like different languages, sometimes you don't have the same terms, or you don't have the same expressions, or the way that they use different words together, the way that they use different meanings of different words together are different. Especially, I think it's especially true for people who speak more than one language, like very fluently. You can tell that there really is like, it's just fascinating to see how different languages are, and also like the similarities, but how culture and traditions also affect the words that are used, and how the words are used, how the words evolved, and how the words are affected by other languages. It's so fascinating, and I feel like the way that it was done here was really like well researched. I mean, I don't know anything about those topics, but it felt like I learned so much from this book as well, because this is still historical, so there are some things that were taken from history, even though it is fiction. So Babble by R.F. Kuang, I love it so much. My copy that I read is the Barnes & Noble special edition, and I tabbed that one and actually physically wrote in the book. That's the first book that I ever really wrote on. I've never done that before. So A Diary of Blood by S.C. Gibson. I know that this has been acquired and published by Hachette, so the cover has been changed, but I actually really like this original cover. So thankfully I got this original one before it was acquired. I think it was acquired like a week after I got the original book, and then I saw how they were going to change it, and I like this one better. Anyway, if you guys didn't know, this is, I forgot a term, but this is a book told through letters. We are following Constanta, who was Dracula's bride. She tells the story of how she met Dracula, how she spent years with him, and also what changed throughout the years and what made her kill him eventually. So that's not a spoiler. That's like the start of the book. Like the very first part says, "And I never dreamed it would end like this, my lord. Your blood splashing hot flecks onto my nightgown and pouring in rivulets onto our bedchamber floor." So like literally the first sentence is like, "I killed you, but I want to tell you why and how we got here." So that's essentially the whole thing. And just, it's really short, but it's so well written, and it's also very like transportive. Like even if it's told in letters, essentially like letters addressed to Dracula, I still felt like I was really experiencing it through Constanta's eyes, like everything that's happening. Just the whole story and the complexities of the relationships that Dracula has formed with Constanta and eventually the other consorts that he eventually had throughout his life. So everything, this whole thing is just like the atmosphere, the vibes, the characters are so compelling and so beautifully well done. I just love this one. And then I have a middle grade book actually. This one is The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. I have been wanting to read this because a lot of people have hyped this up for the past 2 years, and this is following a girl who grows up with the witch of the forest. Essentially in this world, there's a town outside of this forest that every year they would send out a child and leave it in the forest to appease the witch that lives in it, to keep them safe, to keep their town safe. And she is one of those babies. what they don't know is that this witch actually is just minding her own business. Like, she's not looking for like tributes from the town, but she starts finding these babies being left in the forest. So she takes them, she feeds them sunlight, I believe, starlight, as she travels from one end of the forest to the other end of the forest to another town so that she can leave the babies in that town. But one year, she rescues a baby, and instead of feeding her starlight, she feeds her moonlight. She eventually has to decide to take care of the child because of the changes that the moonlight has done to the child. It gave the child powers, and as the child grew and grew, as did her powers, and she has had to guide this child. And along the way in the story, we meet other characters, and we'll learn more about the history of this town and this forest and how they came to the conclusion of giving up children as tributes to the witch, and like the true history really of this town and the people and the forest. So I really enjoy this one. Very heartwarming. It has like very deep theme of family and community, and it's not just like one type of family, but like different types of family, and how, you know, you have your found family, you have your family, your blood family, and the family that you make on your own. So it's very heartwarming, and there's a reason why it's won an award and why a lot of people talk about it and loved it. So overall a great story. And then we have 𝐶_SPARROW by Kristen Cashore. I believe this is the 5th book. There's *GRACELING, there's *FIRE, there's *BITTERBLUE, there's *WINTERKEEP, and there's 𝐶_SPARROW. So I started reading the *GRACELING Realm series 10 years ago, I believe. Back then it was only *FIRE and *GRACELING that has been released, if I'm not mistaken. And then it took, I think, 2 maybe 3 years before *BITTERBLUE was released, and then I read *WINTERKEEP last year as an arc, and then I read *𝐶_SPARROW as an arc as well last year. Well, last year I read *WINTERKEEP, and last year I read 𝐶_SPARROW, and I just love the way that this whole series has grown. I think I said the same thing with *WINTERKEEP when I did a wrap up last year, because I believe it's one of my top books as well. Just the way the story and the world has grown, it's amazing. I still remember reading, the first 2 books when I was still in high school, and it was like one of the first fantasy novels that I read that was really transportive to me, that really introduced me to this really intricate world with this amazing characters that are so just, again, well written, characters that you really root for, characters that you see really grow and change throughout the course of the novel. And with each installment, the world, again, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, but it all still is connected. And with each character that we're following, I can't help but root for every single one of them. So I love this one. I have the Fairloot Special Edition. I do have the other books in the series, but they're in paperback, used UK covers. But I just wanted like one special edition for the book. Hopefully, I will get like the entire *GRACELING Realm Fairloot Edition series soon. But so far, all the ones that I've seen are super expensive. They're like in the 400s up. So it's like $100 each book, and I'm just like, no, maybe not, especially when there's 4 of them that I'm paying that much amount of money. No, I'm good. So waiting for eventually, hopefully, a more affordable like set of that. But I really enjoyed this one. If you haven't read the *GRACELING Realm series, it's one of those that they're more like the first 2-3 books I would say are more companion novels than really like series. But then I would say from the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, you have to read them in order. You're seeing the world and the characters grow through each book. So 𝐶_SPARROW. And then I have The Once and Future Witches by Alix E. Harrow. This has been in my TBR for a while now. I got this one off of, it might be a Lumicrate. Yes, it is a Lumicrate, and this was released 2020. So 2020, I read this in 2022, so 2 years. I've had this in my TBR for 2 years, and I've been waiting for, because it's a witchy book, I always reserve it for like fall time. And I finally got to it around November. So it was still fall, but it was past like October, like the, spooky season. I can't believe it took me so long to read this one. This, again, with the other books that I've talked about, beautiful, transportive writing. We're following 3 sisters during the 1800s, 1893. So late 1800s. So there's a lot of changes within society, especially when it comes to the women's rights movement. In this world, witches did exist or do exist, but they have been killed, a lot of them, and a lot of them have been suppressing their powers because it is seen as evil. So we're following 3 different sisters. They're all witches as they struggle with their power, with what they want to be in the future, because they did grow up with a very abusive father, and they lost their mother at a very young age, and it was their mother who really like cultivated the magic within them, and also their grandmother. But when they lost those 2 nurturing people in their lives, they had to like eventually have to find like their own paths by themselves. And there's a lot of history between the sisters because the two sisters left the youngest sister behind with the father. There was a lot of like misunderstandings and histories that the younger sister didn't know was happening between the two sisters that led them to leave her behind. So she had a lot of resentment against them as well. Again, we're following the three sisters, a relationship with each other, their relationship with other people around them, the paths that they want to take, and the changes in their lives that, you know, they're going through as they discover more about their magic. And again, of them being sisters, like the bond that they have. I cried a lot at the ending, so I am now definitely looking forward to reading more of 𝐼𝐧𝐻𝐻𝐸's books. I believe I read one more book from her that I did like, but it's really this one that like, this is amazing. And it's long, but it doesn't feel long. It feels like it required that 500 plus, 500, a little bit over 500 pages of the story to really follow all three of our main characters and, you know, their growth and change throughout the book. So that's one, Lovely War, as you can see. This is by Julie Berry. Again, this is one of those books that I've been saving and I've had in my TBR for quite a while. I think even before I had a personal copy of this one. I've just heard a lot of people talk about this, and finally I got my own copy, and then it took a while again for me to eventually get to reading this one, but I loved it. I know that I talk a lot about like romance, and I do love a good romance story, but there are a few romance books that are more like love stories to me. I've talked about the difference between those two, but right now I'm not gonna explain that. But this is definitely a love story. At first I was definitely confused with like, why are they having a tryout for Aphrodite? Like, again, and also why did it lead to telling the stories of like these characters and the love between them? But eventually I was just like, you know what, I feel like I'm gonna enjoy it more if I just focus on the stories themselves and not like why we got to those stories. It was just like, you know, but I loved it. It made me cry a lot. There's definitely lots of ups and downs here because this is during World War I or II. I don't know which one, but it's one of the world wars. And of course, you know, there's a lot of death, there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of separations between the characters that we have. It's like every chapter you don't know like what you're gonna get and how the story's gonna go, especially with different witnesses that were asked to provide more background or more details in the story outside of how Aphrodite was telling it. Made me very nervous. It made me cry a lot too. Like painful, heartbreaking tears and crying because of this book. If you haven't read it, please read it. It is very long, but it's definitely one of those books that didn't read very long. There's a few that have like really short chapters, and we are following different characters here, and each of the characters, I just ended up with just wanting them to just be happy. Like, I don't want them to suffer anymore. And with everything that was happening pretty much like every chapter, every other chapter, like I don't know where the story is going to go and how it's going to end and how are they going to end up happy? Are they going to end up happy, or am I going to bawl my eyes out and grieve for them? So I didn't know where the story was gonna go, but it made me cry. It made me cry so much. So those are all the fantasy sci-fi top books that I have. That is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you on the next one.